Good evening. Welcome to the Orange County Historical Society. Thank you for all coming this evening. My name is Chris Jepson. I'm the current president. And we have a great panel discussion, a whole panel of experts here brought together for you tonight on historic cemeteries of Orange County. There are, I will admit, a few historic cemeteries that we're not able to squeeze into this presentation. But maybe that will be part two somewhere down the line. But at some point, there will come a time tonight when we do want to go home. So we're not doing all of them tonight, but we're doing a lot of really interesting, covering a lot of really interesting territory. And with All Saints Day and Day of the Dead, and yes, our more commercialized Halloween coming up, good time to talk about places where we do think of those who passed and we pay our respects to the dead. And which is something we kind of always do with the Historical Society, now that I think of it. We really are all about people and places that aren't here anymore. So, I did want to let you know, next month, second Thursday of the month, we will be having our Authors Night, where we will have at least 6 different authors who have recent books about Orange County history that they will each come up, talk a little bit about their book, and then they'll each have tables where they can sell and sign their books. You can buy the books, you can ask them questions, and usually there's time to engage in them in conversation. So it's always a fun event. We haven't done it for a while, so we're going to bring this back, and so I'm looking forward to that. Watch your newsletter. When the County Courier comes out, you'll see the whole roster of the authors and their books. So I wanted to introduce all of our speakers here this evening. I will start out at this side of the table. Stephanie George, a local historian, genealogist, secretary of the Orange County Historical Society, and was formerly the archivist at both Chapman University and Cal State Fullerton's Center for Oral and Public History. She's also the author of an extensive article on Holy Cross Cemetery in the 2011 edition of Orange Countyana, which we may still have copies of back there for sale. Next word is Cynthia Ward, a member of the Orange County Cemetery District Board of Directors, a docent at Founders Park, former president of the Anaheim Historical Society, is a historian in her own right, and she's given many tours of the Anaheim Cemetery, and she runs a business as well, researching historical properties. Next to her is Tim Deutsch, who's the general manager of the Orange County Cemetery District. So he's the lead dog for many of these important properties, caring for them, and very complicated process, no doubt. And we'll hear some about some of that soon. And next to him is Julio Amarillas, who's the manager of the Santa Ana Cemetery, another fascinating cemetery, and he comes highly recommended to me as well as a speaker and as a knowledgeable person on this subject. And then next to him is Melanie Goss. She and her mother, Ann Depsa, as the Cemetery Angels, have a long record of researching, documenting, and preserving local historic cemeteries. They started at Anaheim, but have worked on the Yorba Cemetery for 20 years. Melanie now works for OC Parks, where she's in charge of 8 historical sites as maintenance crew supervisor and leads tours at the Yorba Cemetery. If you haven't done that, you should do that. So, I'm sure they will have, they may have things that they want to introduce about themselves as well as we get into the program, and hopefully we will have some time at the end for Q&A as well. So with that, I will hand things off to Stephanie as our first speaker for the evening.
As the body of Alfred Schuler was carried to his grave, the funeral cortege followed the horse-drawn bier and chanted in Paradisium. Alfred, aged 10, had died 2 days earlier, a victim of typhoid. His father had traveled from Placentia, their hometown, to Anaheim, and purchased a coffin, rented a hearse, borrowed a team of horses from Joseph Bax, the local undertaker. After the 1.5-mile trip to the newly established Catholic cemetery on County Road, Father Francis Dubel, pastor of St. Boniface Catholic Church, stood at the foot of Albert's coffin and intoned the antiphon, "I am the resurrection and the life." The coffin bearing the body of this small schoolboy was slowly lowered into the grave as his parents, Henry and Martha Schuler, and siblings stood nearby. Father Dubel sprinkled the grave with holy water, recited the amphitheon one more time, and concluded with the final petition: "May his soul and the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace." It was November 29th, 1903. Similar scenes would be repeated throughout the next 100 years, during which time more than 2,700 Catholics would be buried in Holy Cross Cemetery. Now, just to put a few things in perspective, 25 years before, St. Boniface Parish encompassed all what was to be known as Orange County, with the exception of the land south of the division line, which was serviced by Mission San Juan Capistrano. That is, the parish boundaries for St. Boniface were to the north, Los Angeles County, to the east, Riverside County, to the south, the division line, and to the northeast, Los Angeles County. In January of that year, land was acquired for a Catholic burying ground out on East Center Street, just east of the Anaheim Cemetery. Little is known about this first Catholic cemetery in East Anaheim. It offered consecrated burial space to the community of Catholics living in that area, but within several years it became clear that it wasn't large enough, possibly owing to its very small size. What we do know is that most of the bodies were disinterred and relocated to either Holy Cross, eventually Holy Sepulchre, or Calvary, the Catholic cemetery located in Los Angeles. And eventually the property was sold in 1944 by then the Los Angeles Bishop, John Joseph Cantwell. It was 1902 when the third church building for St. Boniface, then built on the northwest corner of what is now Lincoln and Harbor, was in the construction phase that Pastor Dubel felt it was important that the parish establish a newer cemetery. 10 acres were purchased in 1903 from Sisters Sarah and May Flood of Los Angeles on the southwest corner of what is now known today as Euclid and Orange in the city of Anaheim. These sisters had inherited that property from their father, John Flood, who was a contractor in Los Angeles, who was also known as a land speculator. Curiously, within a year, Bishop Thomas Conate had sold all but 3.5 acres to the north. The day the cemetery was dedicated, Father Dubel carefully recorded a handwritten description of the new Holy Cross Cemetery as a foreword to the burial record. It was here that he characterized its location, the divisions, and the lot sizes. Family plots could be purchased for $40 to $50, and single graves were available for $5. According to Catholic custom, a separate section of the cemetery was reserved for children, and Father Dubel noted that it would be known as the children's ground. Here, graves would cost $3, and fees collected at the opening and the closing of an adult grave were $5, while $3 was what was assessed for a child's plot. After careful clarification of the rules and the regulations governing the cemetery, it was affirmed, quote, "Rules of Holy Cross Cemetery enforced on the day of its opening, November 28, 1903, Anaheim, California, Reverend F.J. Dubel." Those buried at Holy Cross were mostly born in California and were predominantly of Mexican descent. Overwhelmingly, the men were laborers while women stayed at home tending to the house and children. Because of parish boundaries, they were residents of Anaheim, Talbot, Fullerton, Garden Grove, Olinda, Horseshoe Bend, and Santa Fe Wells, but they were still all parishioners. And although the ethnic profile shifted dramatically in Orange County between 1900 and 1940, those who continued to be buried at Holy Cross previous to World War II were predominantly of Mexican descent, with close to 80% of those buried possessing Hispanic surnames or having at least one Hispanic parent. Now, as an example, Holy Cross recorded 107 burials in the year 1919. Of those number, those of Euro-American or European adults in turn were just 11. It was fair to say that the other 96 burials that year were residents listed as Mexican, and overwhelmingly, nearly all adult men employed were identified as laborers. What is difficult to ignore, though, is the great number of children who were buried at Holy Cross. Of those 106 burials recorded, 70 were children under the age of 4. Moreover, of those 70, 66 were under the age of 2. Causes of death were many, including malnutrition, pneumonia, meningitis, tuberculosis, and premature birth. Now, Holy Cross Cemetery served the needs of the Catholic community in Orange County throughout the first quarter of the 20th century. Carpenters, laborers, ranchers, housewives, and children. But as the years progressed and more Catholics moved into the county, burial preferences leaned toward the park-like and more ornate and often more expensive Calvary Cemetery in Los Angeles. It wasn't long before Holy Cross developed a reputation as the Mexican cemetery in town. Father Henry Gross, the new pastor of St. Boniface, began corresponding with the bishop in 1937 about the possibility of closing the cemetery. Most of the graves had been sold, and just the physical upkeep alone was a burden on parish staff. There was the old water heater that was broken, or the old water well that was broken, making it impossible to care for new flowers and plants. Graves that were selling for $13, that's about $275 in today's money, didn't allow for any perpetual care funding, and there was a huge financial burden on the parish in order to manage the cemetery appropriately. However, he agreed to keep the weeds at bay and would allow for burials of those who had already purchased graves. The parish also offered the bare minimum with upkeep, but during the succeeding decade, Holy Cross Cemetery fell victim to vandalism, the elements, and lack of attention. A broken chain link fence surrounded the property. Stone grave markers were overturned and destroyed. Wind and rain eroded the land. And lack of routine watering gave the cemetery a dry, desolate appearance, while large weeds sprouted amongst the headstones. And yes, trash and debris littered the ground. Fire broke out in 1953, spreading throughout the cemetery, scorching grave markers, trees, and burned several wooden grave markers that had stood since 1903. Many wooden crosses spared by the fire were left unreadable, erasing forever the names and the dates of those who were buried there. The unkempt appearance did not go without notice. 2 Garden Grove housewives had stopped by the cemetery while they were out for a drive one afternoon in 1955, and they were upset by its appearance. Mrs. Phyllis Pennington and Mrs. Vera Stevens spoke for many when they wrote to the Archbishop saying, "We stopped as it seemed such an error that a place where people's loved ones were laid to rest should be in such a condition. We couldn't understand why. Seeing a cemetery in such ruin led these women to, quote, offer our service in helping the people make a pleasant place to remember their deceased." Apparently the Cardinal agreed, and a program of rehabilitation was under consideration by the diocese. However, Mrs. Pennington and Mrs. Stevens weren't the only ones who took notice. 18 months after their letter arrived at the Cardinal's office, an article appeared in the Garden Grove Daily News exposing the abandoned and unkept cemetery on Euclid. Photographs revealed the poorly maintained headstones and out-of-control weeds that covered the ground. How could we have abandoned this cemetery, whose name has been forgotten by most who were here when it was still in use, they asked. As letters of support poured into the newspapers and angry letters were mailed to the diocese, not only did the diocese and the attorneys need to worry about the outcry from the parishioners of St. Boniface, but they would have to contend with the indignation of the community at large. This was just not a Catholic issue anymore, but one that reflected the views and opinions of the entire community and how they felt about the neglect of this sacred space. Within a few days, the diocese revealed its plan to do something about Holy Cross, though it still wasn't clear as to what. Should the diocese continue with its renovations plan or sell and rezone the land? Maybe all the bodies should be exhumed and reinterred somewhere else. Even the owners of Harbor Rest Memorial Park in Costa Mesa expressed interest in purchasing it and expanding it into a beautiful memorial park. Now, it didn't take long before a revised cost estimate was submitted, and within 6 weeks, the Archdiocese again announced that they would renovate and restore Holy Cross. Included was new irrigation, a new well, a sprinkler system, monuments and headstones would be removed, graves cataloged, and the entire parcel would be graded and seeded with grass. New curbs and gutters would be constructed, and a new driveway would be built down the center of the cemetery, leaving the original paths and roads as areas designated for new graves to be sold later. Grave markers that were still in good repair would be returned to the original grave site, while those markers which were broken, burnt, or destroyed would be replaced with new modern flat markers. And a large block wall was erected that closed the cemetery away from the commercial and residential areas growing up around it. Redesigning the cemetery allowed for 1,000 additional plots. Future sales would be adequate to pay for the restoration and to cover future maintenance. The bishop, as well as Monsignor Edward Wade, then the director of the Office of Catholic Cemeteries, were quite pleased with the investment and the renovations that had been made. We're happy to say that the appearance now is not only a credit to the Archdiocese, but a great asset to the community. In fact, they were so pleased with the renovation, the diocese looked into the purchase of the adjacent 6 acres just north of Holy Cross for expansion. They made the deal, the contract was signed, and the payment was made. But for some reason, now lost to time, the deal never went through, and Holy Cross remained just 3.5 acres. In a twist of fate, this was the very same piece of property that the diocese had sold back in 1904. Many of those additional 1,000 plots never sold at Holy Cross. Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, built in 1931, was favored by the late 1950s for its more modern appearance and lush landscaping. In addition, by 1965, Catholics began choosing other burial options besides strictly diocesan-run Catholic cemeteries as their final resting place. This trend, which continues, saw the Catholic cemetery business drop by more than 59% between 1965 and 1985. In 1986, Orange County became its own diocese, and the custody of Holy Cross was transferred to Holy Sepulchre and the Orange County Catholic Cemeteries. Today, they're still burying those whose families have owned plots for decades, and the cemetery maintains the property The gates are open every day with regularity for visitors. Holy Cross was founded with the intention of offering consecrated burial grounds to the community of Catholics living in Orange County. Those buried there, for the most part, were people like us, working, caring for children, attending school, and building life here in Orange County. And while it continues to function as a resting place for those who have gone before us, this small burying ground has also acted as a catalyst in reminding the residents of Orange County of the importance of memory. There should be a sacred respect for the past, as there is for sacred ground, and it's only fitting that Holy Cross symbolizes them both.
Good evening. My name is Tim Deutsch. I'm the general manager of the Orange County Cemetery District, as Chris mentioned. Before we get into the 3 cemeteries, just wanted to give you a briefing on the Orange County Cemetery District. Probably don't know us as the Orange County Cemetery District. You know us as the 3 cemeteries that we operate in and around Orange County: Anaheim Cemetery, Santa Ana Cemetery, and Toro Memorial Park in Lake Forest. I've been with the district about 17 years. Prior to that, I worked for a city of Newport Beach, and took a leap of faith to come take this job from one public service to another, and couldn't be more happy than what I'm doing now compared to what I did in the city. Having individuals need in their dying moments, or their families' dying moments, being able to take care in perpetuity of a loved one's grave and have families like yourself put your loved ones in our hands is something that the cemetery district has taken pride in. As a public cemetery district, and we're one of about 250 in the state of California, public cemetery districts were tasked with taking care of old cemeteries, similar to Holy Cross, when they became in disrepair. And at a point in time, and I'll talk about it when I get to El Toro, state legislation was passed, and property tax was set aside to help these cemeteries that were in disrepair. And because of that, the fees are affordably much lower than that of private cemeteries or other church cemeteries because of this property tax base that we receive to keep our fees low. It doesn't mean that we're a pauper cemetery, and that's what a lot of people think of public cemeteries, is that's where the indigent or those who can't afford cemeteries at the cost of a burial are buried, and that's not the case. I urge you to go and visit these cemeteries, walk through these cemeteries as the members of the public around us, all our neighbors, do on a regular basis. I'll talk more about some of the programs that we've had at the various cemeteries to bring the community into our cemeteries to learn and to just enjoy the atmosphere that's been created. Not for the dead, obviously, but for their visitors and the public to come enjoy. So with that, I'm going to turn our first cemetery, Anaheim Cemetery, I'm going to turn it over to our resident historian here at the Orange County Cemetery District, Cynthia Ward, who is our second longest standing trustee, has been on our board for, I think, 12 years?
The longest now.
Oh, she is the longest, yes, that's right. Sorry, Bill. With that, I'll turn it over to Cynthia Ward.
I don't have anything as fancy as Stephanie did, I apologize. But I'm going to try to fit a lot of information into about 10 minutes. So if I start to speak too quickly, just wave me down or throw things at me or something gently, and I will try to slow down so that I don't lose people. But this is usually, when I do a tour, it's at least an hour, hour and a half, and I've got 10 minutes tonight. So I'll try to cherry pick the best of it. But the Anaheim Cemetery really set the stage for everything else that happened in Orange County in terms of burial grounds, because it was the first public cemetery. Up until this point, you were buried based on membership in a church or a community organization like the Masons, or your family, like the Yorba Cemetery that you'll learn about later. And so the Anaheim Cemetery became the first public cemetery where anybody could be buried simply by buying a space. You didn't need to have any affiliation with any other group. And even that was a little bit late in coming. Anaheim was founded in 1857, so for the first 10 years, there was no provision for burial space. So at that time, the dearly beloved buried their dearly departed in little corners of their vineyard lots on their own private property, which obviously is not a long-term solution. And so a handful of community leaders got together and created the Anaheim Cemetery Association. They purchased some farmland just east of what was at the time the city limits, out Center Street, just past what is now East Street. And they bought the land for $100. It had been cleared and made ready for a farm, but not yet planted, so it was perfect. They spent about a year putting in roads and surveying out lots so that they could do family plots of 8 spaces each, and then some rows of single graves that could be purchased 1 or 2 at a time as needed. And of course, some sort of perimeter fencing, because everything around it was open cattle ranch. And you wanted to keep livestock from wandering in and eating any of the plants that had been left, or, heaven forbid, putting a hoof through recently disturbed soil. That would be a disaster. So at that point, there were reinterments. Those who had been buried in the vineyard lots were disinterred and brought to their family plots in the new Anaheim Cemetery that we know of. I'm still doing a little bit of research to make sure that nobody in the Anaheim Colony Historic District does their gardening and comes up with something unsavory. But I think they disinterred all of them. And at the time, again, this was the only option in the area. So the Anaheim Cemetery is not just a record of Anaheim's history, it's Orange County's history. And we have the Kramers of Placentia, and we have the Weber family that founded Westminster. We have the history of the entire North County, because everybody came to the cemetery at that time. It wasn't until the Santa Ana Cemetery came in as a public cemetery in 1898 that there was another option available to people. So we really have everybody. In the southeastern corner of the cemetery is a Chinese section. Anaheim had a thriving Chinatown, and the Chinese burials were kept separate from the German settlers that had originally come into Anaheim. And I don't like to put motives on people from the past, because then we're creating urban legend. I want to believe it wasn't a segregation thing. There was genuinely a different type of burial for the Chinese than there were for the Germans. The Germans went the traditional route of 6 feet down for their graves. But the Chinese did not want to be left in American soil. It was shameful to leave your family in American soil. They wanted their bones sent back home. Now, for a long time, we thought that there were still 33 burials in this section, because these are people that were making poverty wages. How could they afford to send their bones back to China? But I was recently educated by the Chinese American Historical Society, who explained that before they left China, part of their employment contract was a sort of burial insurance. And it guaranteed that should they pass away in America, they would be buried in a shallow grave about 2-3 feet down and left for several years while Mother Nature does what Mother Nature does. And then very specially trained professionals would come out and disinter the body, and they would count every single bone to make sure not a knuckle was left behind, and put those bones in an ossuary, a small container with a label that had their name and their pertinent data and the town that they had come from. And they would collect these into crates and send them back to China. So it was guaranteed, if you signed on to take employment in America, you were guaranteed that your bones would come back to China. So you had that assurance. So now we believe that those 33 graves, we hope, now there's just a grove of dawn redwood trees that was put in by the Orange County Cemetery District to honor these people that helped to create Anaheim, because Anaheim would not have thrived if not for the Chinese laborers that came in, because viticulture is an extremely labor-intensive industry, and they couldn't get enough laborers. If the Chinese had not agreed to come down and work here, the community would have completely collapsed. So the original section was very quickly sold out. By 1893, they needed another expansion, and the acreage that they purchased from Captain Irwin Barr came with a condition. Not only did he want a portion of every lot that was sold, he wanted a section set aside for Civil War soldiers, because he was a Civil War veteran. So we have a lot of Civil War soldiers in this one particular area, and a GAR marker to remember all of them. This expansion also took the cemetery all the way out to about halfway between Center Street and what is now Sycamore. So it incorporated the Zanja, the old irrigation canal that came from the Santa Ana River out to the community of Anaheim. Now they finally had a semi-reliable source of water to be able to maintain the grounds, because they were constantly dry without access to water out there. By the turn of the 20th century, things were in really rough shape. Remember, there was no endowment care. Today, when you buy a grave anywhere, you pay an endowment fee, and that is for perpetual care, to make sure someday when every single one of us have gone from visiting cemeteries to being permanent residents, somebody's going to still be there to mow the lawn, because that money has been set aside. This was not taking place in the Victorian era. And so the families were expected to take care of the graves. It didn't even occur to them that you would have to pay somebody to take care of grandma's grave. But once the family dies out or moves away, there isn't anybody left. And the newspapers of the time start to reflect these articles that are begging people, please go out and take care of your family plots, because it was embarrassing, the condition that they were getting into. So during this time, now the children and the grandchildren of Anaheim's original settlers have taken over, and they've come of age, and they've become the business leaders of the community. And they take over the Cemetery Association. And they start a beautification project. And that's when we get a lot of the architecture that you see out at the Anaheim Cemetery, if you've ever been out there. The entrance arch, which is now at the back end of the cemetery instead of the entrance, which is a little confusing. But that was put in by F.A. Hartman, the son of original pioneers. This is when we had the family mausoleums were built. During this time is between like 1900 and 1915. And the family mausoleums were actually brilliant, because if you had already used up all 8 of your spaces, you could put a mausoleum on top and not only make a statement about the socioeconomic standing of your family, but you got more spaces. Because those German settlers were cheap and they were not stupid. So they got extra niches put into their mausoleums. It was also at this time that the Pacific Mausoleum Company was formed. And they bought additional acreage from the Terry family, another farm, which took the property all the way out to Sycamore, where the current entrance is. They also agreed to take over all of the maintenance of the entire cemetery, so that the Cemetery Association would no longer have to do it. It kind of folded into the Mausoleum Company. And they started work on the first public mausoleum on the West Coast. And it was a thing of beauty. It was the place to be when it was built. And people came from all over the county to buy spaces and vaults inside this mausoleum. It's lined with marble. It's absolutely stunning if you get a chance to get out there. We just celebrated the 100th anniversary of it back in 2014. At this time, they're still struggling with maintenance of the cemetery. It's getting better, but the grounds are still pretty rough. And at this point, Fullerton announces that they're going to start a public cemetery. And we have 40 families from Fullerton that are going to disinter their graves from Anaheim and move them to this new cemetery because they're so embarrassed. So it really kind of pushes Anaheim to start taking better care of the cemetery. It was at this time that a water well was funded. We still operate with well water out on that property, so we're not tapping into the city's water. And the Mausoleum Company also agreed to take over the county's indigent burials and the Spanish flu victims, because people that were dying in the county hospital from the Spanish flu had just completely overwhelmed the entire system, and so the county had to take over those burials, and the Mausoleum Company took that over. In the 1920s, the state assembly created a law that allowed for cemetery districts based on the old school districts. And so the Anaheim Cemetery district, the Anaheim Cemetery became its own district. And that allowed a very small percentage of tax money to be levied, which helped with improving the grounds that had not had any endowment care. Finally, in 1985, all of the smaller districts in the county were consolidated into the Orange County Cemetery District, which you'll hear about later. And it wasn't too long after that, about 2000, 2001, that I went wandering out to the Anaheim Cemetery because I was doing some history research. And I was fortunate enough to meet Anne and Mel out there as the cemetery angels, and they taught me all about how to properly care for stone and graves and what to do when something's been broken and in need of repair. And we would spend a lot of time out there just talking about what if. We saw so many projects that needed to be done. So in 2010, I got the opportunity to serve on the Orange County Cemetery District's Board of Trustees, and I jumped on it. And immediately, staff was all in for doing a restoration of the grounds. So in the last few years, all of the family mausoleums have been restored. The entrance archway at the back of the cemetery has been restored. Checked the community mausoleum, which really didn't need any work, but we checked it anyway. Everything is beautiful. If you have not been out there recently, you need to go and check it out, because it really is a place to be proud of as an exhibit of our county's history. And if you really want the good tour, on November 12th at 10 a.m., the Anaheim Historical Society will be doing a walking tour, and come see me afterwards, and I'll connect you with how to RSVP for that, because it is limited space. But even our modern history is still being reflected out there. Some more recent burials we have. Dad Miller, the golf genius, is buried out there. Senator Kuechel, who was the minority whip under President Johnson and helped to pass the Voters' Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, something that completely changed the way our nation operates, is an Anaheim boy, fourth generation Anaheim, and he's out there at our cemetery. So I invite you to come out there and take a look at it yourself and enjoy the history lesson that can be had just by reading the markers. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm not a historian. I don't profess to be. I'm glad I'm surrounded by historians because they educate us on a day-in-day basis. Some of the things she mentioned today, she probably has talked about on her tours where I've been out in the back helping, doing something. I learned some things tonight that I was not aware of the Anaheim Cemetery. When I was studying for the Santa Ana Cemetery, I learned some things as well. So thank you to all you historians that are out here who help keep track of our history of Orange County. Without your voice, without your labor, without your time, we wouldn't have, this history to teach the kids of the future, and hopefully they'll be apt to want to learn. And it's not an app on their phone, but something that they can actually physically put their hands on. Speaking of which, I have 3 or 4 documents, again, thanks to our historians in past. I'll share these, you can come up and take a look at them later, But it was a good segue because some are from Anaheim Cemetery, some are from Santa Ana Cemetery, dating back to as early as the early 1900s, are certificates when we were issuing graves and sale of graves. Original certificate books are plot maps that are bound, information regarding all the burials in alphabetical order. These are all documents that we keep at the district office in a vault that is fireproof, so that, God forbid, something happened to the building, all these records are still intact. As a cemeterian, as we call ourselves in our industry, we're tasked with taking this old data and bringing it forward. And believe me not, it was very difficult, and it still is difficult when we have families who are looking for old graves. Probably a lot of you are genealogists, and you go out and look for records for loved ones. Thank you for that effort as well, because when you search for somebody, it helps us look for data that may not exist in our existing system, because we may have a burial of an individual by year, and that's all we have. Maybe a last name, first initial, and nothing else. But you as individuals who are looking and doing your genealogical research, and you come to us and say, oh, I've got this additional information, we'll add that to our record and continue to provide information for the future. These records are still used. When we have families that are looking, we're not going to find it. So we'll go out to the vault and pull these and carefully search through and try to find the loved one they're looking for. So rest assured, the data is safe. And it's hard data, not in the cloud data. I'm going to talk next about the Santa Ana Cemetery, and I've got Julio Amarillas here. He's our cemetery manager. He operates the day-to-day activities of the Santa Ana Cemetery. I'll give a briefing on it, but he can certainly answer any questions if there may be any at the end of the segment that you can ask about the Santa Ana Cemetery. So a little bit of history about Santa Ana Cemetery. As Cynthia mentioned, Anaheim Cemetery was the first public cemetery built in Orange County. The second was Santa Ana Cemetery. It was originally built in 1870, but not on the site that we know it today, which is off of Santa Clara. It was actually built where the Santa Ana Library and Historical Room is, off of Civic Center Drive and Ross Street. That was the original cemetery that was built, called Santa Ana Cemetery, by the Ross family. There was approximately 100 that were buried in that cemetery, but at some point in time, and I've always told our families, oh yeah, or doing presentations, the cemetery here was built in 1870. It wasn't. The one that we stand in and help families. It was actually built in 1898. So 28 years later, our governance back then decided probably not a good idea to have a cemetery right in the middle of Orange County and where all the state, federal, local buildings were going to be. So they took it upon themselves to exhume or disinter the bodies and place them in this new cemetery. The Ross family donated 100 acres. Now, we weren't the recipient of 100 acres, unfortunately. We received a smaller portion of the 100 acres as the Santa Ana Cemetery back then, and it was established as a Orange County Cemetery District number 1. The remaining was purchased by Fairhaven or St. John's Lutheran. So if you've ever been out at our sites, it looks like one big super site, but it's actually 3 different operators in 3 totally different functions of our industry. Private sector of Fairhaven, St. John's Lutheran, parochial, church cemetery, and then a public cemetery. Again, you wouldn't notice that unless you saw the dividing lines or were aware of that. So to the Santa Ana Cemetery, the first burial was one of the Ross's children. They were actually buried in 1870, but they were one of the first burials along with the other 100 on the site that we recognize today as the Santa Ana Cemetery. In 1926, the cemetery was operated on its own district, as I mentioned. Eventually, some of the dedicated sections like Masonic and Oddfellows were annexed into what we call the Santa Ana Cemetery now. In 1985, as Cynthia mentioned, we were consolidated, where they took the Anaheim Cemetery, the Santa Ana Cemetery, and the El Toro Memorial Park and consolidated under one Orange County Cemetery District. Back then, we had 3 different governance boards, 3 different staff, and 3 different sets of rules that all varied in 3 different price ranges. Now it's all consolidated under one. Pricing may be different at the various cemeteries just based on features, but now it's all under one governance. Today, the Santa Ana Cemetery is 29 acres. That includes all the roads and buildings. Some of the notable historical figures that are buried at the cemetery include the last name Spurgeon. You've seen the roads. Father William Spurgeon was known as the founder of Santa Ana. Robert McFadden, best known in Newport Beach for McFadden Square, McFadden's Wharf. He was basically a transporter from transporting goods and services, or goods from San Francisco down to Orange County through Newport Bay. Dr. C.D. Ball, who started the Orange County Medical Society.
Orange County Historical Society.
And Orange County Historical Society, okay. Well, he was busy. Theo Lacey and family, and obviously you recognize Theo Lacey as a name on one of our jails. He was the 2nd sheriff in the county. And after his death, they obviously honored him by naming the jail after him, which is located in, I think it's actually the city of Irvine, close to Lake Forest. Columbus Tustin, who developed businesses, schools in the area of Tustin. Dr. Philip Howell, Edson and Charles Waffle, so you know the what is it, the Waffle, Howell Waffle House, named in their honor. Again, the Jacob Ross Jr. family, who donated. He was also the first county assessor. Not only that, but there are a number of veterans that are interred at the Santa Ana Cemetery. Over 800 veterans, and of that, 300 plus are Civil War veterans. We've been fortunate, one of our resident historians, Charles Beal, has done research to locate all of the Civil War, actually all of the veterans that are in cemeteries throughout Orange County. So we know where they're at, and we're constantly updating and trying to get them markers if they don't have markers on their graves. And I think we even have the one or two veterans back to the Spanish-American War at the Santa Ana Cemetery. The other cemetery that is the youngest cemetery, I guess you'd say, is our El Toro Memorial Park, located in Lake Forest. It was built in 1896. Originally, why it came to development was the El Toro Land and Water Company in 1896 began as an enterprise. And a way for them to make money so they could bring irrigation to the development was to sell plots. And so with each plot that you bought, or each stock that you bought from their company, you got a plot in the cemetery. They enticed, again, and it was for $1 a space. I know we talk about, pricing. We're not selling for $1 right now, unfortunately. This historic cemetery is on a total of 25 acres of land, part of the original Rancho Canada de los Lisos land grant. Monuments bearing the names of such early settlers as the Serranos, Whitings, Keatings, and others can be found throughout the cemetery's old section of the cemetery, along with many other old pioneers. In 1923, and this is kind of a theme with cemeteries, the cemetery went into disrepair, and the community gotten together and decided they were going to put on a community play called The Lion and the Mouse to raise funds. And they did eventually, to raise funds to do maintenance and clearing of weeds. But that money stopped. And unfortunately, as we've heard, the theme, the cemeteries weren't being cared for. Fortunately, as we mentioned, state legislation was put into place to take care of the maintenance of these cemeteries in the future. Then and in the future. We are fortunate that we get about $2.6 to $2.8 million in property tax annually. We spread that out amongst our operation costs between the 3 cemeteries, and that again helps us keep our fees affordably lower as far as the space fees are concerned. In 1927, the cemetery district was formed, and that was specifically just El Toro Cemetery, and it was called El Toro Cemetery back then. It wasn't until 1983 that the cemetery was changed to El Toro Memorial Park as we know it today. As Cynthia mentioned, in 1985, we were all consolidated. We had a fourth cemetery, Magnolia Cemetery, but at some point in the late 80s, early 90s, the district decided to sell that to the church, who was sharing the property next to it. So we just have those 3 public cemeteries at the moment. Some of the other notable burials, as I mentioned, the Serrano family, which were early settlers. They developed the Rancho Canada de los Alisos property. Their surviving adobe is actually at Heritage Hill. So if you ever get out to go visit,
come see me.
Come see Melanie. Judge William Keating and Eliza Keating, he was the one that developed the first church in El Toro, St. George Episcopal Mission. The Dwight Whiting family has a family plot there. In fact, we just buried probably four family members removed this past weekend of the Whiting family. They have probably 40 plots out there that they purchased or that were given to them. A couple of more recent notes, we have Christian Kent Nelson, and that name might ring a bell to you, but if you ever had an Eskimo pie ice cream, he was the inventor of the Eskimo pie, along with Russell Stover of the Russell Stover chocolates. When we do our tours, that's one of the things that we like to provide to the guest. We don't get Eskimo pies because I don't know that we can get them, but we try to get a replica and replicate and provide to not just the kids but to the adults a little something at the end of the tour. From the sporting world, we have Flojo, Florence Griffith Joyner. Unfortunately, at the age of 38, she passed away. As you know, she was an Olympic gold medalist. Records still today that have been there since 1988. And then actor Gordon Jump, WKRP in Cincinnati. If I'm talking to a younger group, they have no idea what I'm talking about that show. Kids, sorry, we're all young. He's also on the show Soap, if you remember, and then he was the second Maytag repairman after the original man passed away. One thing I also wanted to bring up, we talk about, as Cynthia and I talked about, the community groups that we want, involvement with the community at our cemeteries. And I think this is 3 years ago, before COVID, we did a tour, and some of you might have had the ability to attend. It was a nighttime tour. And talk about trying to coordinate and think about liability, think about, all things, safety. It was a phenomenal. It was actually our second tour. I have booklets up here that we produced for that. You're welcome to take a copy of it. It gives you a history of some of the people that Cynthia had talked about. It was a fun experience for us to bring back old time forward. We had actors that were portraying individuals that have been interred there or were part of the community. It was phenomenal. And it's one thing to do a tour during the day, but then throw it at night where you've got to bring lights and generators and extension cords. If anybody needs an extension cord, please let me know, because we've got probably 400 extension cords, but we'll save them for the next nighttime. So if you missed it, please feel free to come out to the next one. We also have a number of books that we offer, or walking tours. We don't have any more of these in print form. Patty Boardman, and I don't know if she's still living, if anybody knows. She is, okay. Patty helped us write this book here and compile it, and then we bound it and sold it at the Santa Ana Cemetery. Unfortunately, we don't have any more now, but the PDF version is on our website for you to print out if you'd like to, free of charge. We have El Toro Memorial Park. We did a walking tour during the day, the history of us. That's a little more challenging because it's uphill and there's a lot more to deal with than the flat Anaheim Cemetery. This was unusual because we got children from the Orange County School of Arts in Santa Ana, and they all portrayed, from Florence Griffith Joyner to the original caretaker of the cemetery. And it was just neat to see our kids involved in history, and bringing them to the cemetery was amazing, and they were excited about it. And then lastly, we put out every 2 months a newsletter. And in our newsletter, we bring up all information about upcoming programs, tours, just information for the general public, and then information for our families who are visiting. If you're interested, you go on our website, occemeterydistrict.com. You'll see newsletters. There'll be a way that you can actually click on it to register to receive the newsletter, or call the district office and just tell them that you're interested. We'll send it out either via PDF on email, or we'll mail it to you, whatever your preference is. We do still mail things out, so you can put it in your hands. With that, just thank you for your time regarding our 3 public cemeteries. We're hoping to expand. We've got some opportunities coming up here in the near future if you haven't heard or read. We're working with the County of Orange on a site that's in Anaheim Hills. That the land was donated, and it's for the purposes partially of upper parcel for a state veteran cemetery, and then the lower parcel for our 4th public cemetery. And the reason behind that is our Toro Memorial Park is the only cemetery that we have casket spaces available for sale for the public. And we have roughly a little more than 2 years left. So we've been, as a district, as a board, we've been looking for land for probably 15 years or more, looking for land, and we finally were fortunate to be given land by the county. But now the fun begins, because there's a lot of hurdles that you have to jump through to get development. But if we are able to secure this, we're able to secure this cemetery for the next 50 to 75 years for county residents. So I'm going to pass it on to Melanie.
I can speak. So I've been with the Santa Ana Cemetery for 24 years, and there is one thing I do want to share. A lot of people do come to me and say, I search 8th Street and Ross, can't find it. You're not going to find it. I shouldn't have told you that. Maybe I should have let you do that, that hunt. So 8th Street and Ross, that's when the cemetery was first established, and that's at the Santa Ana Public Library. And you're going to notice that its Civic Centers was redirected. So you're going to, in order to find that, it's going to be Civic Center and Ross. So that's where you're going to locate that Santa Ana Library. So it's just funny that everybody comes back and says, you told me it was 8th Street and Ross, right? So you're not going to find it. So anyways, that's the clue to finding it. So anyhow, if you guys have any questions, I have been there 24 years. I do know a lot of stories here and there, and I'll be more than glad to share them with you. So.
I have a question, actually.
Absolutely.
Santa Ana Cemetery, I'm very familiar with it, and it butts up next to Fairhaven. The Mausoleum, which is fabulous. That's part of Santa Ana Cemetery, am I correct?
No, it's not. That's part of Fairhaven. The only mausoleum that the Orange County Cemetery District owns, it's in Anaheim Cemetery.
Oh, I want it to be part of Santa Ana.
No.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I know. If you Google Maps, it'll take you. It'll point there, but no, it's not. Sorry. I wish.
Yeah,
That would have been
beautiful.
nice.
It's a beautiful cemetery.
Right. Okay, so I'll pass it on to Melanie.
Last but not least, you're the last to let us down.
I'm just going to tell you bedtime stories. It's that time, isn't it? Just about. Hello there. I do not have a PowerPoint either. I do have some pictures on a flash drive, so can I give it to you in a few minutes? You can put it up there. Oh no, forget it. I'll do it myself. Okay, in a few minutes. So, as you've already heard, my mom, who is not here, she planned a vacation and didn't check her dates. So she's not here, she's in Texas. My mom and I are known around town as the Cemetery Angels. We did start at the Anaheim Cemetery where we met Cynthia and we got to work with these fine gentlemen here. We were there for a while and then we accidentally on purpose ended up at the Yorba Cemetery. So as volunteers, we went to the cemetery trying to help them, and at the time our services were not needed. But when they got a new ranger, we were allowed to come in and help. And so then we started learning all the things that are the Yorba Cemetery. So I'll give you a brief history because I'm only going to tell you a little bit. I'm going to make you come out to my tour that we do the first Saturday of every month at 10 a.m. If you want to hear about all the people who are buried there. So I'll just give you the basics of the cemetery and its history. So in his community that had come to the meeting that he called, if you guys can donate any money at all, it can be a penny, a nickel, a dime, it didn't matter. He would put that towards the building of the church, and he would donate all the land, and everyone agreed. Before that could happen, Bernardo passed away. So, because the land that he was going to donate was his horse corral at the time, he could not be buried there. So the Native Americans that he employed and the other folks on his rancho carried his body relay style all the way to Los Angeles for burial. He was buried at the Plaza Church, where he stayed till 1924, but we'll get to that part. In the meantime, everyone, all of his neighbors and everything wondered what was going to happen with the cemetery and the church. And Bernardo graciously left not only the land, but he left all the money needed to build those things. And he provided for all of his neighbors. So the first burial in the Yorba Cemetery was in 1862. It was Jose Dominguez. So the cemetery originally was 100 square feet. That was it. It was just a small plot of land up on a rise above Yorba. People were being buried there at a pretty rapid rate. The cemetery was being filled up. There was never a map made of the cemetery. Prudencio, who was one of Bernardo's sons, he was the official caretaker of the cemetery because St. Boniface, as you heard already, they were the local Catholic diocese, and they couldn't come out there all the time. So they would come out when there was a funeral or if there was, a certain special event that they were needed. Other than that, it was up to the families just to go ahead and bury, and Prudencio kept notes. Prudencio's notes are very vague. It was $10 to bury an adult and $5 to bury a child, and it was this. Melanie paid $10 to bury so-and-so, that's it. Not under the tree, in the corner, around the bend, there was none of that. It was very, very vague, but at least we have that part. So, time goes on. The cemetery's filling up, starts to kind of exceed its boundaries a little bit. Bernardo, being up in Los Angeles, the cemetery that he's in is being heavily vandalized. They found Pio Pico and his wife, Pio Pico's wife out of her mausoleum underneath a tree. So the city of Los Angeles decided that land would be better suited as a parking lot. And they set out to move everyone. They sent letters to people, to the families of people who were buried there, and they said, you can tell us where you would like your family members to go, and if you don't respond, then we'll put them in the new Calvary Cemetery. So at that point, Bernardo and 9 other family members were returned to his beloved land. So he is actually interred in his cemetery. So that was 1924. In 1935, the cemetery was surrounded by land that was owned by the Anaheim Union Water Company. And the Anaheim Union Water Company crews would go out there to do work, and they would find bodies. They did not appreciate that very much. Can't understand why, but they started to freak out. So they started a letter writing campaign in 1935, and by 1939 the cemetery was closed for burials. The thing about it is that not only was it closed, and there was nobody out there really taking care of it, because again, we're back to the whole, it's up to the families to take care of it. There's no perpetual care, there's none of those things. And it was very, very far away from everything. Still, by 1939, it was still very desolate out there. It was very dark. There was one set of brothers that lived not too far from there, the Sepulveda brothers that lived not too far from there, thank goodness, because when the kids would come up to scare each other in the cemetery, one of the Sepulveda brothers would jump on his horse with his big pea coat jacket with a big collar, and he would pop the collar up and ride down there and scare them. They thought it was a headless horseman. So that's how he ran out vandalism during his time living there. But the cemetery started to fall into disrepair. It was really bad. A lot of vandalism over the years. In the 60s, Marie Northrop, I'm sure you're all familiar with her, her husband was a descendant of the last burial, Jose Fuentes. They went out there to visit his family and find the graves and do some research because she was a genealogist way before the internet. And the weeds were so tall that they couldn't find anything. She would go around and drag her feet until she kicked something, then she would part the weeds to see whose headstone it was. But things were knocked over. Every headstone that we have left, which is not that many, has been knocked over at least once in that cemetery. So she wrote a letter complaining about, oh my gosh, these are super important pioneers, how dare the diocese let it be falling into disrepair or whatever. And they didn't really do much about it. The cemetery ended up being sold to the county in 1972 for $1 with the agreement that they would keep it as a historic site or they would return it to the diocese. Great. They put up a short fence. Anyone with any gumption could get over it, no problem whatsoever. And they really did nothing with it until about 1980. And again, at this point, it had been really, really fallen into disrepair. So at that point, they decided to do something with it. They came in and they removed all the headstones. They put them in Ben Yorba's barn on the other side of the river. They came in and they burned off the weeds, including all the wooden headstones that were left, all the wooden structures that were left. They put down 4 inches of dirt, made it look nice and pretty. They brought the headstones back, and they didn't make a map.
Oh, jeez. That's good.
So Ben Yorba went, okay, that goes there, and this goes here, and this goes there, and pretty sure that one goes there, but... So when you hear the Pink Lady story, and you hear Miss Albina de los Reyes' name being thrown around as our resident ghost, her headstone is in the wrong place. So I know that because we have photographs of her mother-in-law's headstone in her current headstone's resting place, I guess is the best way to put it. So there are some errors. My mom and I started working in that cemetery as volunteers 22 years ago, and we have seen a complete stop in vandalism. We had one incident in the time that we have been taking care of the cemetery, and it was 10 years ago, maybe, nah, probably longer than that, now 15 years ago, maybe. Somebody stole the pipe cross, and one of the Grijalva descendants actually replaced it, so it's still there, so. Anyway, I have been, well, my mom and I have been big champions to try to get cameras in that cemetery, so just in case there's vandalism. We've been trying to get signage for the cemetery because still you can't find it. If you don't know where it is, keep driving, you'll find it. It's right next to a pool and it's right next to a tennis court, so there's your clues. So when you're trying to find the Santa Ana Cemetery, you have Julio's clues, and when you're trying to find my cemetery, it's find the pool. We have recently been given the okay to, I should back up, let me pause that on the okay. My mom and I, as we discover where people are buried, and we have to be like 100% for sure, because I don't want another case of Alvina, with their headstone in the wrong place. When we have definitive proof that someone is buried in a location, we put a white wooden cross on their grave. So we have managed to locate 70 people and their burial spots in the cemetery. There are 450 people known to be buried in that cemetery with actual written proof. There are 135 headstones or partial headstones in that cemetery left. That's it. There's 50 of the 70 crosses in there right now, because trying to put a cross in the ground is like trying to put a cross on this table. It's the dirt is clay, it's hard, you can't even put water on it and make it work, it's crazy. But we have been recently, back to my last pause point, we have recently been given the okay to start doing some work at the Yorba Cemetery, and we're really excited. So Julio and Tim are going to help us. They're going to show us how to fashion concrete headstones with stamping of the letters and the names. We're going to put the names and the dates, and everywhere where we have put a cross that we know for sure where there's a person buried, we're going to put a headstone on their grave. That way, 150 years from now, when we're gone, somebody else can find out where these people are buried. It's super important. We have surrounds for the graves that are sinking. They're curbings. They look like curbs all around family plots. They are sinking, some of them, a lot, and they're gonna also help us with that. We have some child graves that have lambs on them and the heads have been kicked off of them over the years. We're gonna have a restoration company repair those. So we do have signage now. They finally put in signs about 6 months ago. I'm super happy about that. And we do have cameras in the cemetery. So all the things, so far, all the things that we have been trying for 22 years, 2022 has been our year for sure. So we definitely invite you to come out. We talk about the people who are buried there. We show you photographs of what it looked like before. We show you photographs of the folks who were buried there. So that's what I got.
I don't want us to go too late, obviously, but if there's a few questions from the audience, now would be a good time.
Can I make a comment? We went out to the Yorba Cemetery. She gives fabulous tours.
Yes, she does.
And I'm from another area. I moved here 20 years ago, and I thought all the Yorbas were gone. I thought they disappeared. There's a lot of Yorbas in town. Okay. And it was really a nice tour, and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have nothing but respect for all these people and the work they do, and just incredible. You know, the people who care about cemeteries really care. You know, they got a big warm spot in their heart. Charles, I think you had a question.
Yes. I'm out in Holy Cross, and there are a lot of headstones out there. You mentioned they kind of different Northern Cemetery, that they moved all the headstones, cleaned it up, brought them back. More vandalism after that, or what happened to a lot of the headstones there? Or were they just unmarked graves?
Well, there may not have been headstones or crosses to begin with. So those that were still there when they did the restoration project, luckily they did keep very good records about where everybody was buried. So they were able to take the headstones that were there, clean them up, and then replace them in the proper place. And I think another theme that has happened is there was a lot of reinterment and moving. I mean, it just was almost rampant all the time. I mean, people were moved out of the original Catholic cemetery in Anaheim and moved to Holy Cross, and then they went up to Calvary, and eventually, we'll go back to Holy Sepulchre. I don't know why per se. I mean, obviously there were personal choices about that, but all the headstones that were there are there. So.
More questions?
For the Yorba Cemetery, how large is it now? Because you said initially it was only 100 square feet.
It's bigger than that. You know what? I should know the answer to that question. Out of everything that I know, that is the one fact that I don't know. But it's significantly bigger than that.
Well, yeah, 100 square feet is a 10 by 10
right
room.
Right. Yeah, I'm not really sure who they thought they were going to bury there exactly when they started, but it's considered. How big is it? You were there.
I want to calculate 1 acre.
There you go. That sounds about right. A little over an acre, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask one question? As a veteran and a family of all veterans from way back, how much data do you have? And do you collect that data on what veterans are there, what branch they were in? Do you have anything that we could collectively get together that were in the veterans' history?
Charles, introduce yourself. Charles Beal. Again, Charles did a former county surveyor. Before he retired, one of his projects, he went around to almost all the Orange County cemeteries, right? At least the ones that we're aware of, and located every single veteran's grave, has it on a database.
Not everyone.
Not everyone. As many as he could find. And, the thing about veterans is there are some that chose to have civilian markers on their graves.
Yeah, they did.
So when we have Memorial Day and Veterans Day, we do put markers on, or flags on every grave. So the families will come and at each of the 3 cemeteries, we have lists of where those civilian markers are. So that volunteers come and put out the flags to honor those veterans when they don't normally get a flag.
Don't know that they choose to have veterans put on, they just have.
Correct, correct. But yeah, Charles has done a great job of helping us with that around the county. So we have as much data as possible, and you know, you're welcome to come ask about individuals, or you know, we're always trying to update our data as well, keep it as relevant as possible.
Findthegrave.com. A lot of my information for the veteran graves here in Orange County is on findthegrave.com. I've done Civil War, Spanish American, War of 1812, Mexican. I'm starting on World War I, so that's kind of, you know, I put all my photos out there, and you know, the data on Find the Grave, and then I've got a database, you know, of all the veterans graves.
Busy guy.
Pardon?
Busy guy. That's for sure.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
He's retired.
Yeah, no, my day job is working at the county archives, and I think Charles has been in so many times doing background research and has shared so many of his files. So you can come in, and a lot of his notes and hard work is stuff you can come and look at, and for your own research purposes, your own edification. So thank you for that too.
Just
I have a question for the Anaheim Cemetery, the Chinese section that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You said that there is just not necessarily identified as some trees or something. Is there any marker? Is there any honor that's given to the people that are there?
There is a marker out there. There's a boulder with a plaque on it.
Okay.
That explains that the Orange County Cemetery District's Board of Trustees, at the time that the cemetery district was founded, has set that space aside specifically to honor the Chinese that lived there, that lived in Anaheim and were buried there. And there's a grove of dawn redwood trees to mark the area, so it will not be reused as empty space. It is set aside for the memory of the Chinese workers.
You mentioned that Anaheim Cemetery, there was a Civil War veteran area that, but you mentioned GAR symbols. Those are Union. Is there Confederate that was buried there also?
There are veterans in the Anaheim Cemetery dating from the War of 1812 all the way through the most recent military conflict.
The answer to your question is yes.
Those sorts of
But-
Confederate
Yeah.
and Union.
Yes, there's Confederate and Union.
Yes.
Yes.
Just talking to the speaker about the Anaheim Cemetery, you were talking about the original entrance.
Mm-hmm.
I recall maybe over 20 years ago, there used to be a portal that came in off of Lincoln at the southeast corner that were to have been built probably about the time that all the mausoleums were constructed. And then it is no longer there, but you were talking about an original arch entrance or something that's in the back. Is this the same thing? And where is it? I haven't been there inside there, or noticed that it had moved.
Originally, you gained entrance by going out Center Street past East Street, and then turned down what they graciously called Cemetery Road, which was a dirt track that came into the cemetery. And so that was the original entrance. And then in the teens, they put up the archway to mark that entrance. Well, over time, as the cemetery grew and it pushed north towards Sycamore, then Sycamore became the entrance. So if you're going there now, the street address is on Sycamore, it's 1400 East Sycamore. And that's really the entrance, it's where the office is, it's where the gates open. And so you kind of head for the back of the cemetery to get to the original front of the cemetery.
I get where you're going with that, but it used to be there, but it was disused. It was obviously not in use for decades.
Right, that road has actually been closed now.
It looked to me like something was built.
And something was built. It's this house that's like one room wide,
Exactly.
shotgun style all the way down.
Exactly.
But you know what? We've had no vandalism ever since, so God bless whoever built it.
So what happened to that archway construction?
The archway is still there.
Is it just not visible anymore from Lincoln? Is that why I don't know?
Yeah, because it's set far back. Cemetery Road really is set quite a bit back from Lincoln. So you're not going to see it from
So
Lincoln.
the archway's still there?
Archway is still there.
Okay. Feel much better.
It was part of a restoration project, as Cynthia mentioned earlier. The arms of the arch were separating because they didn't do rebar in between, and so we brought in a restoration company to restore that back to its natural state and protect it in place. And because it was for buggies for the most part, once buggies got big and became automotive cars, they didn't want to risk the chance of people trying to drive through there, so that's when they closed it off. And we protected it. Our future is to make it a rose garden for direct burial of cremains in the rose garden.
I'm looking forward to looking at it more carefully. I'm glad you folks did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question. The Santa Ana Cemetery, I work with, or volunteered to find a grave to photo. Basically all the corners, there's no painting. What's section like most cemeteries have? Is there some way volunteers could do that, or is there some way you guys could do it, or?
Yeah,
Answer that question.
yes.
absolutely. That's actually coming up in the near future. And we're trying to get this done before Halloween, Dia de los Muertos. So yeah, you'll see that here shortly.
Because I have to go on, I know you guys have a cemetery district,
The kiosk.
but I just have so much trouble on a mobile using it.
Knock on my door.
But I go on Google and download maps of sections for the cemetery, and one is like 50 years old, one's 20 years old, and they're both different. Some of the streets have been taken out and put graves in, and so those maps are useless basically. So trying to find a grave is very, I give it up.
Have you tried using our system, what it's called Walk? Is that the one you're talking about,
I
Walk the
have
Grave?
trouble on my phone using it. I guess maybe on a computer it might be easy. And I know you can click on mobile or whatever, but I just have a lot of trouble using it.
It's hard to read.
Yeah, don't ever be scared to knock on my door.
Yeah,
I'll
knock on
more
the
than glad
Knock
to
on
help
his
you.
door, that's what I
I do want to knock on it. My relatives are buried there, so.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll be more than glad to help you. Yeah, but those markings are coming. Yeah, here in the near
Those
future.
disappeared when we repaved, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, thank you to our panel so much for sharing your knowledge and for answering questions for us. And I'm sure in the future we can track you all down and ask you more questions. And I'm very glad to hear that the cemeteries appreciate the historians and the genealogists, and that we're helpful to you, because heavens knows you're helpful to us. So a great symbiotic relationship there. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for coming tonight. And if you are not already a member and would like to be, we do this every month. Been doing this since 1919, so we're not going anywhere. You can sign up for membership back there with Lynn, who's waving her hand in the back corner there. Also, we do have a bunch of our books back there for sale if there's any of them you don't have or might be interested in, on a wide range of topics relating to Orange County history. So, thank you all for coming tonight. Help yourself to goodies in the back, and we'll see you in November for Authors Day.